There's something quietly unsettling about walking into a room packed with people and immediately feeling like you need to escape. Not because anything dangerous is happening, not because the people are unfriendly, but because something deep inside your nervous system starts screaming that this is wrong. Your heart rate picks up, your breathing becomes shallow, the walls feel like they're closing in even when they're not. You scan for exits before you've even figured out where you're supposed to be. And while everyone else seems perfectly comfortable navigating the sea of bodies, you're calculating the fastest route back to solitude. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. But you're also not like everyone else. There's a fascinating psychology behind people who genuinely hate crowded places, and it goes far deeper than simple introversion or social anxiety. It touches on evolutionary wiring, sensory processing, and the fundamental ways our brains interpret safety and threat. Because when someone says they hate crowds, they're not just expressing a preference, they're revealing something profound about how their mind works. Let me ask you something that might feel uncomfortably specific. When you're in a crowded space, do you find yourself hyper-aware of every conversation happening around you? Can you hear the woman 3 tables over talking about her divorce, while simultaneously tracking the argument between teenagers near the door? Do you notice the fluorescent lights flickering in a way that seems to pulse with your heartbeat? Can you smell someone's cologne mixed with coffee and cleaning products, and that particular scent of too many people breathing the same air? If yes, then you're experiencing what psychologists call sensory overload, and it's one of the primary reasons some brains simply cannot tolerate crowded environments. But here's what's fascinating about this psychological response. It's not a weakness or a character flaw, it's actually a sophisticated survival mechanism that served our ancestors incredibly well. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, which is monitor your environment for potential threats and maintain awareness of escape routes. The problem is that modern crowded spaces trigger ancient alarm systems that were never designed to handle the complexity of contemporary social environments. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For most of human history, being surrounded by large groups of strangers was genuinely dangerous. Unknown faces meant unknown intentions. Dense crowds meant limited mobility. High noise levels meant you couldn't hear approaching threats. So the brains that survived and passed on their genes were the ones that stayed vigilant in these situations, the ones that felt uncomfortable when surrounded by too many variables they couldn't control. What we now call crowd anxiety might actually be the remnant of incredibly effective survival instincts. But evolution didn't prepare us for shopping malls, concerts, or subway cars during rush hour. These environments trigger our threat detection systems, but there's no real threat to respond to. So instead of fight or flight leading to actual fighting or fleeing, we're left with all the physiological arousal and nowhere productive to direct it. The adrenaline builds, the cortisol surges, the mind races through worst-case scenarios while the body prepares for action that never comes. This is where the psychology gets particularly interesting, because not everyone experiences this response with the same intensity. Some people can walk into Times Square on New Year's Eve and feel energized by the chaos. Others feel overwhelmed walking into a busy coffee shop. The difference isn't about courage or social skills, it's about fundamental neurological wiring and how individual brains process sensory information. Research in neuroscience has identified something called sensory processing sensitivity, which affects approximately 20% of the population. People with this trait have nervous systems that process sensory information more deeply and thoroughly than the average person. They notice subtleties that others miss. They pick up on emotional undercurrents in rooms full of people. They feel textures, sounds, and lights more intensely. And when all of these heightened sensitivities are activated simultaneously in a crowded environment, the result can be genuinely overwhelming. But it's not just about sensory overload. There's also a profound psychological component related to control and predictability. Crowded spaces are inherently unpredictable environments. You can't control who will be there, how they'll behave, what they'll say, or how loud they'll be. For people who find comfort in being able to anticipate and manage their environment, this lack of control feels deeply unsettling. It's like being asked to relax while sitting on a chair that might collapse at any moment. Even if the collapse never happens, the possibility keeps your nervous system on high alert. This need for environmental control often develops from early experiences that taught someone their safety depended on being able to read and respond to their surroundings. Maybe they grew up in chaotic households where they learned to monitor everyone's moods, to predict when conflict might erupt. Maybe they experienced situations where being caught off guard led to genuine consequences. Over time, their brains became exceptionally skilled at threat detection, but this skill comes with the cost of feeling overwhelmed in complex social environments. There's also a fascinating connection between crowd aversion and what psychologists call cognitive load. Every social interaction requires mental processing power. You have to read facial expressions, interpret tone of voice, monitor your own responses, and navigate unspoken social rules. In a one-on-one conversation, this cognitive load is manageable. But multiply that by dozens or hundreds of people, and the mental processing requirements become exhausting. It's like trying to run multiple computer programs simultaneously until your processor starts overheating. Some people have brains that are naturally efficient at filtering out irrelevant social information. They can focus on their companion's conversation while tuning out the rest of the crowd. But others have brains that treat every social signal as potentially important, making it impossible to ignore the background noise of human interaction. They're processing not just their own social experience, but absorbing fragments of everyone else's experiences too. This psychological pattern often shows up in other areas of life as well. People who hate crowds frequently prefer deep conversations over small talk, small gatherings over large parties, and familiar environments over new places. They tend to be observers rather than performers, listeners rather than speakers. They often have rich inner lives and intense focus when they're interested in something, but they also tend to get drained more quickly by social interaction and need more recovery time after being around groups of people. What's particularly striking is how this trait intersects with creativity and empathy. Many people who struggle with crowded environments are highly empathetic individuals who unconsciously absorb the emotions of others. In a crowd, they're not just dealing with their own feelings, but picking up on the stress, excitement, frustration, and anxiety of everyone around them. It's like being an emotional sponge in a room full of people who are leaking feelings everywhere. This empathetic sensitivity can be a tremendous gift in intimate relationships and creative pursuits, but it becomes overwhelming in large groups. Imagine trying to have a phone conversation while 20 other people are talking in your ear. That's what social environments can feel like for someone whose brain doesn't naturally filter out emotional information from others. The modern world tends to interpret this sensitivity as a problem that needs to be fixed rather than a trait that needs to be understood and accommodated. We're told to push through discomfort, to expose ourselves to crowded situations until we get used to them, to basically override our nervous system's feedback. But what if the goal isn't to become comfortable with crowds, but to understand why some brains work differently and honour those differences? The workplace becomes particularly challenging for people with crowd aversion, because modern office culture seems designed to maximise the very conditions they find overwhelming. Open floor plans, team-building events, networking mixers, collaborative spaces where privacy doesn't exist. These environments aren't just uncomfortable for crowd-sensitive individuals, they're actively draining. They're being asked to perform their best work while their nervous system is in a constant state of mild alarm. And here's something most people don't realise. The person sitting quietly in the corner at a party isn't necessarily shy or antisocial. They might be engaging in what researchers call strategic positioning. They've unconsciously chosen a spot where they can see most of the room, have their back protected, and maintain easy access to an exit. This isn't paranoia, it's spatial intelligence. Their brain is solving a complex environmental puzzle to minimize stress and maximize their ability to function in a challenging situation. But society often misinterprets these adaptive behaviors as problems. The person who declines invitations to large gatherings gets labeled antisocial. The one who leaves parties early gets called rude. The individual who suggests smaller group alternatives gets seen as difficult. There's an assumption that everyone should not only tolerate crowded environments, but actually enjoy them. This creates a secondary layer of stress for crowd-averse individuals who now feel broken for having a perfectly natural neurological response. The guilt becomes particularly intense around holidays and celebrations. Family reunions, weddings, graduation parties, these are supposed to be joyful occasions. But for someone whose brain interprets large gatherings as threats, these events become endurance tests wrapped in social obligation. They want to celebrate with loved ones, but they also know that attending means hours of overstimulation, followed by days of recovery. So they face an impossible choice between honouring their own needs and meeting others' expectations. What's fascinating is how this psychological pattern shows up differently across cultures. In societies that value group harmony and collective celebration, crowd aversion can feel particularly isolating. The individual struggles not just with overstimulation, but with the sense that they're fundamentally incompatible with their cultural values. They love their community, but they can't tolerate being surrounded by their community all at once. Technology has created interesting new complications for this population. Social media provides the illusion of crowd participation without the actual sensory overload. Someone can feel connected to hundreds of people through their phone while sitting alone in their living room. This can be incredibly satisfying for people who want social connection but struggle with physical proximity to large groups. But it can also create pressure to translate online social comfort into offline crowd tolerance, which simply doesn't work that way. The rise of virtual events during recent global changes offered an unexpected gift to crowd-averse individuals. Suddenly, they could attend conferences, concerts, and social gatherings from the safety of their own space. They could control their sensory environment, mute overwhelming audio, take breaks without explanation, and participate on their own terms. For many, this was the first time they'd been able to fully engage with large-scale events without sacrificing their mental well-being. But as society has shifted back toward in-person gatherings, these accommodations have largely disappeared, leaving crowd-averse individuals feeling more isolated than ever. They've tasted what full participation could feel like when their neurological differences were accommodated, only to have those accommodations removed as soon as they were no longer necessary for everyone else. There's also a temporal aspect to crowd aversion that most people overlook. It's not just about the number of people present, it's about the duration of exposure. Someone might handle a crowded grocery store for 20 minutes but feel overwhelmed at a 3-hour wedding reception. The same person might enjoy a brief interaction at a busy farmer's market but struggle with an all-day festival. Their tolerance isn't binary, it's contextual and finite. This creates challenges in relationships where partners have different crowd tolerances. One person wants to attend every social event, while the other needs careful selection and limited exposure. Neither perspective is wrong, but finding compromise requires understanding that crowd aversion isn't about being unsocial. It's about having a nervous system that processes group environments differently. Sleep patterns often reveal the true cost of crowd exposure for sensitive individuals. After spending time in crowded environments, they frequently experience what could be called social hangover. Their minds replay conversations, analyze interactions, and process all the sensory information they absorbed. This mental activity can persist for hours or even days after the event, disrupting sleep and requiring significant recovery time. The economic implications are worth considering too. Many career paths, from sales to entertainment to hospitality, require comfort with crowds. People with crowd aversion may find themselves steering away from potentially fulfilling careers simply because the work environment would be too overwhelming. They're not less capable or less ambitious, but they recognize that certain professional settings would compromise their mental health and performance. Educational environments present similar challenges. Traditional classrooms, lecture halls, and campus events can be overwhelming for students whose brains work this way. They may excel academically, but struggle with the social and environmental demands of conventional educational settings. Online learning and smaller class sizes can dramatically improve their academic performance, not because they're antisocial, but because they can focus their cognitive resources on learning rather than managing sensory overload. The medical and therapeutic communities are beginning to recognize that crowd aversion isn't always something that needs to be cured. Sometimes it's a trait that needs to be understood, respected, and accommodated. The goal isn't necessarily to make everyone comfortable with crowds, but to help individuals understand their own patterns and develop strategies that allow them to navigate social situations authentically. What emerges from understanding this psychology is a deeper appreciation for the diversity of human neurological experience. The person who thrives in crowded environments isn't better or worse than the person who finds them overwhelming. They simply have different nervous systems that excel in different conditions. Both perspectives contribute something valuable to human society, and both deserve recognition and respect. And respect. The tragedy isn't that some people struggle with crowds. The tragedy is that we've built a society that assumes everyone's brain works the same way. We've created systems, spaces, and expectations based on the neurological experience of the majority, then labelled anyone who doesn't fit as broken or antisocial. But what if the problem isn't with the individuals who find crowds overwhelming? What if the problem is with environments that ignore the reality of human neurological diversity? Consider how differently our world might look if we designed spaces with crowd-sensitive individuals in mind. Restaurants with quiet sections that aren't just for families with children, but for anyone who needs reduced stimulation. Concert venues with sensory-friendly viewing areas where sound levels are moderated and lighting is less intense. Shopping centres with designated quiet hours when music is turned down and crowds are naturally smaller. These accommodations wouldn't detract from anyone else's experience, but they would dramatically expand access for people whose brains process environmental stimuli differently. The interesting paradox is that many crowd-averse individuals are actually highly social beings who deeply value human connection. They don't dislike people, they dislike the overwhelming sensory and cognitive demands of large group environments. Given the right conditions, they often form incredibly deep, meaningful relationships. They're the friends who remember your birthday, who notice when you're struggling, who create safe spaces for others to be vulnerable. Their social contributions are profound, just different from those who thrive in large group dynamics. This distinction becomes crucial when we examine the difference between chosen solitude and imposed isolation. Someone who deliberately avoids crowds because they understand their own needs isn't isolating themselves. They're practicing sophisticated self-care. They're making conscious choices about when and how they engage with others based on their psychological and physiological limitations. This is emotional intelligence, not social dysfunction. But societal pressure often pushes crowd-averse individuals towards situations that compromise their well-being in the name of being normal or well-adjusted. They attend events they don't enjoy, accept invitations that drain them, and force themselves into environments that trigger stress responses, all because they've been taught that avoiding crowds is somehow wrong or limiting. The result is often a form of social masking where they learn to appear comfortable while internally struggling. This masking takes enormous energy. Imagine having to consciously override your nervous system's alarm bells while simultaneously trying to be socially engaged, professionally competent, and emotionally available. It's like trying to have a meaningful conversation while someone is playing loud music directly into your ears. You can do it for a while, but the effort required is exhausting and unsustainable. The workplace implications extend beyond just open office environments. Team building exercises, company parties, networking events, client entertainment. These activities are often presented as optional, but practically required for career advancement. Someone who consistently opts out may find themselves excluded from informal decision-making conversations, or passed over for opportunities that require relationship building in group settings. They're not less capable leaders or collaborators, but they're being evaluated based on their comfort with crowd-based social interaction, rather than their actual job performance. What's particularly insidious is how this creates a feedback loop of self-doubt. When someone consistently feels drained or overwhelmed in situations that others seem to enjoy effortlessly, they begin to question whether something is fundamentally wrong with them. They might seek therapy to fix their crowd anxiety, take medication to manage their stress responses, or push themselves harder to adapt to environments that will never feel natural to them. But consider this alternative perspective. What if their discomfort with crowds isn't a bug in their psychological system, but a feature? What if their heightened sensitivity to environmental stimuli allows them to notice things others miss, to pick up on subtle social dynamics, to create more thoughtful and intentional relationships? What if their need for quieter, smaller social interactions leads to deeper conversations and more authentic connections? The modern mental health conversation often frames crowd aversion as something to overcome rather than something to understand and work with. Exposure therapy might help someone tolerate crowded situations better, but it doesn't change the fundamental way their nervous system processes information. It's like teaching someone to ignore pain rather than addressing what's causing the pain in the first place. There's also a generational component to consider. Older adults who grew up before the era of constant stimulation might find that their crowd tolerance has decreased over time, not because they've become more antisocial, but because the baseline level of environmental noise and chaos has increased dramatically. What used to be considered a moderately busy environment now feels overwhelming compared to the quieter world they remember. Young people face the opposite challenge. They've grown up in an era of constant connectivity and stimulation, but some still find crowds overwhelming despite being accustomed to busy environments. For them, crowd aversion might represent their brain's attempt to create boundaries in a world that doesn't naturally provide them. Their discomfort with large groups might be a healthy response to overstimulation rather than a social deficit. The dating world presents unique challenges for crowd-averse individuals. Many social opportunities for meeting people happen in crowded environments like bars, clubs, parties, or large social gatherings. Someone who finds these situations overwhelming might have fewer chances to meet compatible partners, not because they're antisocial, but because the venues don't match their neurological needs. Online dating can help bridge this gap, but it also creates pressure to eventually translate virtual connections into face-to-face meetings in public spaces. Parenting becomes complicated when crowd-averse individuals have children who thrive in group environments, or when they need to attend their children's events that involve large gatherings. School plays, sports games, graduation ceremonies, birthday parties, these are important moments in their children's lives, but they're also potentially overwhelming experiences for parents whose brains work differently. They want to support their children fully, while also honouring their own psychological needs. The guilt around this is particularly intense because good parenting is often associated with enthusiastic participation in group activities. A parent who consistently feels drained by school events or community gatherings might worry that they're somehow failing their child, even though their discomfort has nothing to do with their love or support for their family. So if you recognise yourself in this description, remember that your brain isn't broken, it's simply wired to process the world differently. Your discomfort with crowds isn't a limitation to overcome, but a signal to honour. The goal isn't to force yourself into environments that drain you, but to find ways of connecting that actually nourish you. Because the world needs people who notice what others miss, who create deeper connections, and who understand that sometimes the most profound conversations happen in the quiet spaces between the noise.